Hello, biology students! Today we're going to be talking about Protista, also known as protists. This is that weird category we might have mentioned, and you might have been like, what is that? I have no idea what a protist is. And that's okay, because we're going to figure it out now. We're going to practice it in class. So let's learn about what these mostly single-celled things are that we never really talk about much. So a protist is a eukaryote. The important part to notice about that is that notice it has a nucleus in it. This is a little confusing because it looks like it's a bacteria, but since we know it's a eukaryote with a nucleus, it means it can't be a bacteria. Bacteria have no nucleus. And these guys are more complex. They have other membrane-bound organelles, and they're also larger than a bacteria. So a protist looks kind of like a bacteria, but is totally not. It's its own category. Protist is a eukaryote. The next thing to know is that they come in all shapes and sizes, and that can be really confusing because it's hard to identify them. They can be heterotrophs, consume things, or make their own food, autotrophs. They can be unicellular, one-celled, or multicellular. I would say most of them are unicellular, though. They can reproduce asexually or sexually. So they're very diverse. They come in all shapes and sizes and do all sorts of things, but they are eukaryotes. They have a nucleus. That part is super important because they're in that domain eukarya. We're going to talk about the three major groupings within the kingdom protist. They can be kind of animal-like, kind of plant-like, and kind of fungus-like, which is why we've learned about some of those other categories in the past. And we're going to talk about how they fit into those groups. So before we do that, it is important to know that these single-celled, mostly creatures, move in cool ways. One way they do it is with the structure called cilia. These are short hair-like projections, versus a flagella is a long whip-like tail, or kind of like a big foot at the end of a organism. And then lastly, there's pseudopods or pseudopodia, and those are like movement of the whole organism, the cytoplasm of it, and it changes its shape. So let's look at some examples to make more sense. So the paramecium here has these little hairs. Which category does that seem like it fits in? Oh, that's cilia, right? These are single little hairs, and there's lots of them, cilia. Versus this is one long tail, that's a flagella, right? Sperm have flagella too. Pseudopodia is this projection of the cytoplasm, and if you've ever heard of the movie The Blob, that moves through those big projections of itself. The blob is actually based on an amoeba that moves this way. If I look at each of these organisms, notice that I see a nucleus, and I see other organelles. That tells me that it's complex, it's a eukaryote. It's definitely a protist, not a bacteria. Again, reproduction, we talked about that they can do it in a couple different ways. So asexually, they would be making identical cells or clones, because asexual makes clones. One type of way we call this is binary fission. It's kind of like mitosis. Sexually, they make gametes, and we know sexual reproduction is better in the sense that it creates genetic diversity and allows for better survival of the population. So another major thing to know is a lot of people find that protists are important because a major category of them is plankton. And we might think plankton from SpongeBob or just plankton in general. But what is plankton? Well, plankton is considered the two following groups: phytoplankton and zooplankton. Phyto meaning photosynthetic, zooplankton meaning animal-like plankton. And so that zooplankton are the heterotrophs, they consume things, and the phytoplankton do photosynthesis, and they're more plant-like. And we really rely on these to be the bottom of the food chain for our oceans and water. And without these two groups that are all together called plankton, a lot of different food chains would disappear because they wouldn't be able to support other organisms eating them, like whales and other things like that. Let's now talk about animal-like protists. An animal-like protist is something like this paramecium. It's heterotrophic because animals are heterotrophs, and they will consume other things. So here's a couple examples. All of these different things will eat stuff as a parasite, or they'll actually put stuff into an almost belly-like part of their organism. All right, this would be the vacuole, and it would eat something through this. And they will do this through endocytosis, which we learned about a long time ago. But either way, they're eating other smaller cells, and that makes them animal-like. And again, plant-like things would be kind of like our phytoplankton we just learned about. They do photosynthesis, meaning they have chloroplasts, they have chlorophyll. Because they have these complex things, we know for sure they're eukaryotes. Oftentimes these things look a little bit more green because of the chlorophyll. And most of the time, again, remember, we think of them as single-celled, but we even have some multicellular protists like green algae. That's a protist, seaweed, right? And we rely on seaweed to do a lot of photosynthesis. Some people even eat it. Yum, yum, yum. And our last category is heterotrophs that are more like fungus. And we consider them more like fungus because they're actually decomposers. They're breaking down dead or decaying things. So some types of slime molds are considered protists. Some sort of things that grow on fruit that aren't actually themselves fungus, they're more like a protist. That's a weird category, but we do need to know some are a little fungus-like. Well, great job, guys. You just learned about protists. We're going to practice identifying them in class. Good job.